Hi there, good to have you back for your weekly dope on stories contemporary and consequential, with a focus on India's geopolitical, geoeconomic, geostrategic compass and everything else that impacts national life. We are only a couple of days from knowing who the next president of the United States of America would be. In earlier episodes, I have brought to you deep dives on who would be better US president for India between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. I have also focused on the assassination bid on Trump and how it reflects on the polarization in American society. We have also discussed the role of religion in American politics, as also that of the dollar by way of corporate funding of elections. This episode, we look at what's this endorsements business in the US presidential polls, why American newspapers are choosing not to endorse any candidate in the fray this time. Like earlier, let's understand American society through the prism of celebrity endorsements. Also, for those interested in the US, what are these swing states? How is it so easy to identify which state votes for which political party, and how final outcome can be at odds with the popular vote? Yes, literally, it can happen only in the United States, perhaps, that people choose somebody and the Electoral College elects a different president than what people thought. Let's unspool some of these interesting aspects of the most powerful democracy in the world. You might be wondering why the US is so important. Well, you already know why the US president's election is important for India. In many ways, our growth trajectory has got hinged to the United States. The Satya Nadellas and Sundar Pichais, the Geeta Gopinaths and the Ajay Baggas, the Tulsi Gabbards and Ro Khannas, the Sunita Williams and Kalpana Chawlas up there in space are representative of the kind of connect the two democracies have. Also, from the internet you might be using to watch this episode to the iPhone on which you might be watching it, from the software that determines your flight schedules to the Boeing aircraft in which you might be traveling, from the AI chatbot that you use for your child's homework to that cousin who sends regular supplies of Jim Beam bourbon, to your boss reminding you of Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada, to the office colleague who reminds you of Anne Hathaway, also in The Devil Wears Prada. You know why America has seeped deep into our psyche? So let's get going. It just days before the D-Day, that's November 5, when we would know who the next president of the still most powerful nation in the world would be. The United States of America has been in the midst of a very polarizing, hot, and sometimes even ugly campaign with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris leading Republican and Democrat charge, respectively. Last week, the Washington Post came out with a surprise announcement that they won't endorse any candidate this election, becoming the latest in a series of such announcements made this month, including by the Los Angeles Times and the USA Today. Before I go deeper into what this means, let's understand why these endorsements happen and why they are typical of American politics. The history of this practice goes back to 1860, when for the first time Abraham Lincoln was endorsed as the preferred candidate by the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and other newspapers prevalent in the then Civil War-ridden USA. An editorial endorsement represents a newspaper's institutional view as against the newsroom, which brings reporting from the ground and carries the burden of facts and fairness on its shoulders. Thus, by its very definition, the editorial endorsement is based on opinion, ideology, and often the worldview of the owners. So, for 170 years till 2008, Chicago Tribune remained decisively Republican, only endorsing the GOP candidates owing to the conservative leanings of their owners. Only in 2008, when local boy Barack Obama was running, did the newspaper endorse Democrats. Similarly, in the case of the LA Times, from 1881, when it was established, to 1972, it only endorsed Republican candidates, reflecting the political ideology of the Otis Chandler family that owned the brand till the year 2000. That explains why, in the case of both the Washington Post and the LA Times, the call to skip endorsements this year came from Jeff Bezos and Patrick Soon-Shiong, their respective owners. The editorial boards had Harris World's draft endorsements ready, and the owners' decision saw many of the editors resigning in protest. Not only that, in signs of how sharply polarized American society stands today, the Washington Post lost as much as 10% of its online digital subscribers who canceled in protest. See in the graphics the operative para of the explainer op-ed that Bezos wrote to clear his position. I read some of it. Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, I'm going with the newspaper A's endorsement. None. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. Eugene Meyer, publisher of the Washington Post from 1933 to 1946, thought the same, and he was right. By itself, declining to endorse presidential candidates is not enough to move us very far up the trust scale, but it's a meaningful step in the right direction. I wish we had made the change earlier than we did, in a moment further from the election and the emotions around it. That was inadequate planning and not some intentional strategy." Unquote. A very pensive Bezos seems to be hitting two birds with a single stone. In the main, the op-ed emphasized how it made no difference to any side, even as it succeeded in creating a perception of bias. But his chief grouse seemed more against the loss of credibility that journalism in general and his platform, Washington Post in particular, were facing. That the erosion of credibility had more to do with the inner workings of the profession, where increasingly journalists and editors were talking to an echo chamber of elites and not necessarily to the masses on whose behalf they are holding the conversations. The LA Times owner Patrick Soon-Shiong said in an interview with the newspaper that not offering an endorsement would be less divisive in a tumultuous election. Both the owners have got panned for fronting their business interests over editorial independence, with most polls showing Trump either leading or in a tie with Kamala Harris. The criticism is an admission that Trump might actually win. And it seems policy and sentiment mix while these endorsements are written. Go back to the 1920s when the New York Times endorsed Alfred E. Smith just on one issue, prohibition. A despairing editorial board, perhaps holding Bourbons in hands, wrote of how the loss for Smith would hand over all the fortresses in the hands of the Dries. Smith still lost to Herbert Hoover, and American society struggled with the consequences of prohibition for some more time before the 18th Amendment was finally repealed in 1931. The Washington Post decision must be particularly disconcerting for the Harris campaign, as she becomes the first Democrat in over 3 decades to not get endorsed by the newspaper. So how impactful have these endorsements been? Of the 23 candidates endorsed by LA Times since 1881, 12 have won, while 11 lost. Sort of even Stevens. Post only endorsed Democrats since 1992, of which Bill Clinton and Obama won twice, Biden once, while Hillary, Al Gore, and John Kerry lost. That makes it 5 wins to 3 losses. And it's not just the newspapers that endorse. American society has its rich and famous openly taking sides. A few episodes back, we saw how a clear pattern emerges between sectors of industry and business endorsing which political party. Conservative Republicans get support from traditional brick and mortar industry, while the liberal Democrats are preferred by the new age tech and software segment. Elon Musk has gone the whole hog in backing Trump, putting his money where his mouth is. And for the first time in his work life, Bill Gates has come out openly to endorse the Harris campaign with a $50 million grant. Forbes magazine found over 100 billionaires in the corners of either former President Donald Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris, and surprisingly, with many more backing Harris than Trump. The magazine's breakdown recorded 83 billionaires supporting Harris and 52 backing Trump so far. Billionaires leaning towards Kamala may seem out of place, since a key theme of Democrat campaign has been the criticism of Trump's crony capitalism. But there are political reasons why the ultra-wealthy might want to favor Harris. A letter signed by more than a dozen billionaires last month, endorsing Harris, explained their belief that Harris will continue to advance fair and predictable policies that support the rule of law, stability, and a sound business environment, indicating the support for the status quo as the US economy and stock markets exhibit strength. Again, if you connect the names in this letter with their backgrounds, most happen to be from the Silicon Valley and perhaps grew familiar with Harris during her time as a California prosecutor. Yet there are big names who have chosen to sit at the fence like the newspapers. Sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett, former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, Meta chief Mark Zuckerberg, investor Ray Dalio are some of the names that have preferred to sit out, citing unhappiness or lack of excitement at the candidates from both sides. Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Democrat himself, while releasing his endorsement, expressed dissatisfaction upfront on why he was not very excited with the candidate, but would still prefer Kamala over Trump. And with such high stakes and higher visibility, can Hollywood be left out? On the day that Trump and Harris had their only debate this election cycle, the biggest headline was Taylor Swift coming out with her endorsement of the Democrat candidate. Again, like in the case of newspapers, does it have an impact? In her Insta post endorsing Kamala, Swift had attached a link to the voter registration website called vote.gov. In the 24 hours that the link was live on the celebrity handle, 406,000 plus voters registered against a daily average of 300,000 visitors. Some of it could easily be called a Swift bump. After Oprah Winfrey endorsed Barack Obama in the 2008 Democratic primary, researchers analyzed Oprah magazine subscription data, book sales, and election results to see if Obama performed better than expected in places where people subscribe to the magazine or where books recommended by Oprah's book club sold particularly well. The research could connect Winfrey's endorsement with an additional 1 million votes for Obama in the primary out of more than 30 million votes cast. But then again, with same Hollywood set endorsing Hillary Clinton in 2016, she still lost. Irrespective of the impact of these endorsements on the fortunes of presidential candidates and their political parties, my takeaway is that this injects an element of transparency and disclosure into the system. And for any democracy, that lifting of the veil is important, even desirable. We in India do not have this yet, but may we have moved in that direction in some measure over the last decade. Before I move on, shall we make an endorsement of ours? Well, who between the two candidates is good for India? If you look at it, India-United States relationship has been on a solid upward trajectory over the last 2 decades. The bond has been bipartisan, so irrespective of a Democrat or Republican administration on Capitol Hill or a BJP or Congress government on the Raisina Hill, the two democracies have been strengthening the working relationship. Trump sees India as a legitimate target of his trade wars, calling India a tariff king, but also has great chemistry with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. More than a couple of times in his campaign, he has called Modi a strong leader and his great friend. During Trump presidency from 2016 to 2020, India saw a relatively smooth going in terms of managing its own affairs without undue interference or hectoring from the US deep state. The relaunch of Quad gave India greater salience in the global geostrategic firmament and made New Delhi a compulsory pit stop for geopolitical hobnobbers. Biden presidency has seen India as a reluctant ally that needs a bit of push and shove. Add to it the liberal Democrat establishment's activism on issues like religious freedom, minority rights, etc., and the last 4 years have been those of some discomfort on both sides. The American deep state role in the Khalistan affairs did not help either. It's becoming clear that Canada, under a gullible Trudeau, has just been a pawn with the American deep state in needling India. And the most discomforting is the role the US might have played in destabilizing Bangladesh to the disadvantage of India. You simply don't do that to allies. It's not kosher. Speaking on Bangladesh, Trump has literally read the riot act to the puppet Muhammad Yunus regime in Dhaka in his Diwali message for the targeting of Hindus and Christians in the violence that followed Sheikh Hasina's ouster. I think in sum, so far as India is concerned, it should be A for Trump. Moving on to our next one, we're still staying with the US elections. It's going down to the wire you have heard. Its tie announced the CNN last week. And a typical watch of the American news TV throws up buzzwords like the swing states or battleground states, dozen times to a bulletin. What are these? To begin with, it's English. Swing means to go from one side to the other, like a swing does. So a swing state is one which votes Democrat one election and Republican next, and vice versa. Something like Himachal Pradesh or Rajasthan, till recently in India, that swing or swung between the BJP and the Congress every election cycle. In the case of United States, as we know, they have 50 states plus the Union Territory of Washington, D.C. Of these, there are 20-odd states, big and small, that have voted only one way, Democrat or Republican, in the last 4 decades, which means they never swing, making any second-guessing the verdict in these states an exercise in futility. So effectively, it boils down to those states which swing where pitched battles happen between candidates for voter attention. That's why swing states are also battleground states. The closer the election, tighter the contest, more significant these states become. In 1992, which was Bill Clinton's first election, there were as many as 22 swing states, meaning 22 of 50 states that had voted Republican in 1988 and hence for George H.W. Bush swung and voted for Democrat Clinton in 1992. This time, the US pollsters have put 7 states in this category: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Of these, it's a tie in Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, while in the remaining 3, Trump has a bit of an edge, according to pollsters. Others go further and say that while the contest is in these states, there are just a few counties within these that would determine who becomes president on Tuesday. Let's understand the dynamics one by one. Arizona, famous for the Grand Canyon and Emma Stone, it borders Mexico and so becomes a battleground for the most important election issue of 2024, the illegal aliens. Arizona has 1 in every 4 voters as Latino and saw massive pro-Trump protests in 2020, though it went to Biden by a narrow margin. In 2016, it had voted Trump, contributing to his victory. Would it swing back? It might boil down to one county, Maricopa, which has roughly 60% of the total registered voters of the state. Plus, there's a parallel Senate contest between Trump-backed Kari Lake and Democrat Ruben Gallego, and whosoever wins takes the state. Pennsylvania, the second state, is famous for Will Smith and the Liberty Bell. The state is next to D.C., and Butler County was the scene of Trump shooting this July. Victory for the former president here would imply the assassination bid on him created a favorable sentiment. Pennsylvania carries heft with the big population and big contribution to the Electoral College, giving 19 votes out of 538.
Looking for a job, and I've always wanted to work at McDonald's, but I never did. I'm running against somebody that said she did, but it turned out to be a totally phony story. So if you don't mind, I want to work the French fry counter.
Absolutely.
Okay, how much are you paying me?
How much are you paying?
Third state, Wisconsin, famous for the Harley-Davidson motorcycles, was a manufacturer there. The state voted Trump in 2016 and Biden in 2020. The Republican Party held its national convention in Milwaukee in Wisconsin, with Trump getting a hero's welcome just after being shot at. So a lot is riding for him in this swing state with a mashup of urban and local voters. The fourth state, Nevada, Hoover Dam is here, as also Las Vegas. Latinos constitute 1/5 of the population, and voters, so a Democrat victory would depend on their mobilization, given Trump's clarion call for biggest mass deportation of illegal aliens in U.S. history. Fifth one, Michigan. The Mustang and Medina come from here. It's in the Great Lakes region, so what's known as the Midwest, with Detroit as its capital, which is also the capital of auto industry in the United States. If there was one state representative of American politics, it's Michigan, perhaps. Urban centers vote Democrat, rural communities vote Republican. It was here that Trump made the comment of bloodbath in auto industry, which got twisted as bloodbath generally in the US if he came back to power. It was also here that Trump said that while Musk is great with his electric cars, they cannot go far. America still needs its gas-guzzling big cars made in Detroit.
You know, Georgia started early voting and they broke historic records in early voting. North Carolina started early voting, broke historic records in North Carolina. Now, who is the capital of producing records? So we are going to break some records here in Detroit today. Yes, we are.
The sixth state, Georgia, home of Martin Luther King Jr. and the headquarters of CNN and Coke in Atlanta. Georgia is same size as Cuba and contributes crucial 16 votes to the Electoral College. Latest polls show Trump having a whiskers edge over Kamala and is in a must-win situation to get to the White House. And the last one, North Carolina. Michael Jordan, Krispy Kreme come from here, and the first powered engine flight happened in this state. Interestingly, it's a sort of bellwether in the sense that while Trump won in 2016, he lost this state. And when he lost in 2020, he won North Carolina. So whether he would want to lose again to win the larger battle would be interesting to watch. So that's about the swing states and the counties you should be watching on Tuesday. But it's not as simple as that. Americans like complex things. An American president is not elected directly by the people. There's an electoral college which does that, which is a halfway house between people directly electing their president or the Congress doing it on their behalf. So what happens is that each candidate has to get popular vote in his or her favor, based on which they get a share of electors, which is typically 3 to each state, plus the Senate members, which is 2 to each state. Taken together, they form the Electoral College, which adds up to 538 members. Somewhat similar to the 545 MPs that we have in India, who technically elect the Prime Minister, of course, choosing along party lines. A majority of 538 is 270, and so whichever candidate goes past the 270 mark first on Tuesday walks to the White House. There have been instances in the past where a candidate got the popular national vote but did not go past the 270 mark, like it happened famously in the year 2000 with Al Gore losing to George W. Bush. Even in 2016, when Trump won the contest, defeating Hillary Clinton, she had 2 percentage point more popular votes than the winning candidate. Trump, of course, got the Electoral College. Confusing. Well, that's how the Americans want it to be. So keep watching that number, and thanks for watching this episode of Get Me Right.